Hello and welcome to the very first video on my YouTube channel. I'm Shara, if you don't know me. I am starting this channel to create interesting content around feminism, sustainability, fashion, and where all of those kind of intersect. I find it super interesting, and I'm really just wanting to kind of open up a lot of conversations, just share a lot of the thoughts that I have around these topics, like on a day-to-day basis, and the things that I've learned sort of at university, things that I'm learning in my job. I work in sustainable fashion, and so yeah, I'm just really excited to have you guys along for the ride with me. I hope you enjoy this really first video. I've got a very professional setup going on with a very old camera on top of a stack of 4 books, and I also can't see myself, so I hope this is in focus. I hope we're off to a good start. Cool, let's get stuck in. So in this first video, we're just doing a simple sort of book review. I've picked out 7 books, all about feminism, women's rights, fighting the patriarchy, all written by different authors with different perspectives. 4 of them are non-fiction, but 3 are also fiction, because I know some people prefer one or the other, or you might like to read both, whatever you're kind of in the mood for. And I'm just going to give you like a rundown of why I found them really interesting and some of the quotes that stood out to me when I was reading each of them. So, So to kick things off, I'm going to start with Helen Lewis's Difficult Women, A History of Feminism in 11 Fights. So this is basically a retelling of the history of women's rights, but without sugarcoating the people that were involved, the women that were involved in these fights. So when I say fights, what I mean is like different themes, different things, different areas of life that women have had to fight for and sort of fight within for their rights to do certain things. So that includes things like divorce, the vote, obviously, education, abortion, just to name a few. And what's really interesting about this is that Helen really highlights the fact that we can't have a complete history of these things and these things as they relate to women and women's rights without acknowledging that these people were flawed, that these people were human, and that in no way takes away from their achievements or, you know, things that they accomplished for the movements that they were pioneers in. And also the fact that we can't just discount women for not being absolutely perfect. So a quote that sums that up probably much better than I just did there was where she writes in the book that a history of feminism should not try and sand off the sharp edges of the movement's pioneers or write them out of the story entirely if their sins are deemed too great. It must allow them to just be as flawed, just as human as men. So this book by Reni and Eddo-Lodge is very different to the first book. It is mostly focused around racism and race relations in the UK. There are a lot of amazing revelations throughout this book, which are really important, but I'm including it in this list because she also makes a lot of really interesting observations tying in race with feminism. Yeah, so this book has a lot to say about kind of intersectional feminism and how Black women experience feminism and feminist movements and all of that kind of thing. One of my favourite quotes from this particular book was where she writes that women are supposed to smile, swallow our feelings and be self-sacrificial. Bossy is ugly, and of course the worst thing a woman could ever be is ugly. As Black women, our blackness already situates us further along the ugliness scale. God forbid we be fat. Yeah, so really interesting if you want kind of that intersection between race and sexism, racism, sexism, all that good stuff. Moving on to the third non-fiction book, which is an absolute favourite of mine. I mean, all of these are, but I love this, especially because Criado-Perez also has a podcast called Visible Women, which is kind of based on the same concept, and she also has an email newsletter that she sends fairly regularly. So the idea with this book is that she, in this book, exposes the gender data gap, which means that throughout the course of history, data that has been recorded about numerous things, like anything in the world basically, is not taken into account gender as a factor that changes things for women versus for men, or where we do have the data, which is quite rare, nothing's been done about it. So this has a lot of consequences, from sort of healthcare to like the legal system to the way that like cities are designed. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. And in her podcast and in her newsletter, she continues to dive into a lot of the stuff that is in here, but then also tackles like new topics. So it's things like, why is it that pianos are not designed for like most women's hands? Like, it's things like that, things that you wouldn't even think of, that are just like right there, like beneath the surface. Really great book, really enjoyed reading this. A bit more sort of like scientific, data-driven, if you're into that. And then the last non-fiction that I want to talk about is Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates. I don't actually have a thing to hold for this one, because I did read it as an audiobook. But Men Who Hate Women is about the manosphere community on the internet. It is, I have to say, it's a very sort of heavy read. It is, you know, can be quite triggering. It talks a lot about misogyny, sexism, and how that is kind of playing out online in these groups, kind of like men's rights activists, incels, those sorts of communities online. And it is it was for me quite a struggle to get through, but it is really hard-hitting and really important. She also has a follow-up that has just come out called Fix the System, Not the Women. I haven't dived into that one yet, just because it was so full-on, but I do think definitely worth reading, just for the sake of like staying informed, understanding like the dangers of these online communities, not just for women, but for like men, like young men and boys growing up. Okay, and then moving on to fiction for the people that kind of want a bit of a sprinkle of feminism, a bit of a interesting kind of quotes to take away and think about, without kind of the really heavy-hitting like hard data and like philosophical, political, gender politics insights. You know, sometimes you're just not in the mood for that. And that's where these books come in. So starting with Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. This is, first of all, I mean, the cover, it's beautiful. I went through a real phase of like buying only books that had like this colour like on the spine. It was a bit of a weird phase, but I mean, they were all great books. Anyway. Yeah, so Girl, Woman, Other follows the lives of 12 different people in kind of the modern day UK. And on the back it says, it is future, it is past, it is fiction, it is history, it is a novel about who we are now. There are so many types of people and types of women that are shown in this book, and they have so many different layers that I recommend reading this all in one, or like as close to all in one as you can, because the different storylines really interact in really interesting ways, and I definitely read this over too long a period of time, so it was harder for me to put things together in my head because all the storylines kind of intertwine. So yeah, recommend reading this in like one or two bouts, like on the train. Definitely one that like showcases just how like diverse women's experiences can be in the world, but this just kind of brings that to life in like a really beautiful way, and she's a great writer as well. So the second one is The Power by Naomi Alderman. This book kind of starts with like a lot of really good reviews. It was definitely a page turner. It's basically based on a world where women discover that they have this kind of electrical power surging through their veins, which they can basically use to kind of take over the world. And it's kind of like a very dramatic role reversal of like, what if women were in charge? And like some of the stuff that happens in this book and the way that some of these women like take charge is like pretty shocking, and it kind of makes you think like, okay, if women were in charge everywhere, and if women had all of this power, would we actually behave this way? Like, would we actually do the things that happen in this book? It's really interesting to think about. When you go online, like, some of the reviews for this book are not great. Some people really hate it. I did like it. I do think it is worth a read, even just for like the thought experiment side of it. And also, like, again, the cover is beautiful. And now, last but not least, the final fiction book that I want to talk about is The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams. Like, when I really like a book, you can tell because all the pages are like folded down and I've highlighted or like underlined so many things. This book was probably the best fiction book that I think I read in 2022, or the one that I most enjoyed. So this is about a girl who is the daughter of a man who is working on the first edition of the Oxford English Dictionary. So it takes place kind of at the turn of the 20th century, and it's so emotional. Like, you get to kind of build up such a love for the main character. And the idea is that she starts working alongside her dad on the dictionary, but she becomes interested in the words that are left out of the dictionary. So things that are said in everyday conversations that aren't, you know, seen in written language. And a lot of that is like women's words, so words that women use in kind of in the market, at you know, in the kitchen, like things like that. And she starts to kind of collect these lost words, and it's super interesting. I have so many quotes that I love from this, so like literally just turning to a random page. Our grandfather was outspoken on the topic of women's rights to vote back when universal suffrage was the political argument of the day. I wonder how our dictionary will define universal. Back then it meant all adults regardless of race, income or property. But it did not mean women, and against this our grandfather railed. It would be a long campaign, he was heard to say, and to be successful it would have to be fought on many fronts. And then further down it says, once the question of women's political suffrage has been dealt with, less obvious inequalities will need to be exposed. Without realising it, you are already working for this cause. As grandfather said, it will be a long game. Play a position you are good at and let others play theirs. So as you can probably tell from that, the right to vote, the fight for that is a key topic in this book. And it's really interesting to see how the characters kind of like grapple with it and the different perspectives that the different women in the book have on it. So definitely saved the best for last there. I really enjoyed reading this. It made me cry on the train home as well, which was kind of embarrassing, but also like it was so good I don't really care. Okay, and that is going to round up this video. I hope that you enjoyed those recommendations. I hope that you find something in there that you really love, or if you're looking for a gift for that feminist in your life, which I hope there's more than one feminist in your life, but gifts for feminists, gifts for women in general. Hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you for the next one. Bye!